Good evening, Windsor.
Just 1 minute ago, shocking details emerged from behind palace walls, a late-night discovery so serious that King Charles and Prince William were forced to take immediate action. What began as a quiet evening quickly turned into a moment that could reshape royal dynamics in ways few ever expected. Sources revealed that the discovery came unexpectedly, catching even senior members off guard. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was serious enough to trigger a decision that had long been avoided. The removal of certain royal privileges once considered untouchable. Inside the palace, tension filled the air. Conversations were hushed. Expressions turned solemn. This was not about punishment or pride. It was about responsibility, trust, and protecting the future of the monarchy. King Charles and Prince William reportedly stood united, understanding that what needed to be done could no longer be delayed. What makes this moment especially intense is the timing. The decision came late at night, when emotions run deeper and truths are harder to ignore. Those present describe a heavy silence, broken only by quiet determination. This was not a choice made lightly. It was one made with a heavy heart. Royal insiders say the discovery forced difficult questions to surface. Questions about loyalty, boundaries, and the line between personal choices and royal duty. And once those questions were asked, there was no turning back. Once those questions were asked, now is no turning back. Now it is no turning back. Now is no turning back. Now, the world is beginning to sense that something significant has shifted. What exactly was discovered behind closed doors? And whose royal privileges have truly been stripped, and why now? The night fell quietly over the palace, but inside nothing felt calm. There was a stillness in the air that carried weight, the kind that settles only when something irreversible has occurred. Lights glowed softly behind tall windows, shadows stretching across halls that had witnessed centuries of history. Yet this night felt different, heavier, more personal. What began as an ordinary evening turned into a moment that would reshape everything. A late-night discovery surfaced quietly, without warning, but its impact was immediate. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't arrive with chaos or urgency. Instead, it crept in slowly, leaving behind a feeling that something sacred had been shaken. King Charles was among the first to understand the gravity of what had been uncovered. His expression revealed a deep stillness, not shock but realization. Years of experience had taught him to recognize moments that alter the course of history, and this was one of them. His eyes reflected thought, restraint, and a weight that could not be shared lightly. Prince William stood beside him, absorbing the truth in silence. The atmosphere between them was heavy with understanding. No words were needed. This was not a moment for emotion alone, but for responsibility. Both men understood that what lay before them would demand courage, clarity, and sacrifice. Those nearby sensed the shift instantly. Conversations paused. Footsteps slowed. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The discovery wasn't scandalous in nature, but it was deeply concerning, a revelation that forced long-standing assumptions to be questioned. Trust, once firm, now required careful reflection. The decision that followed was not impulsive. It was measured, painful, and deeply personal. Removing royal privileges is never taken lightly. It carries emotional weight, historical consequence, and personal cost. Yet in this moment, it became clear that avoiding the truth would cause greater harm than confronting it. King Charles did not raise his voice. He did not express anger. Instead, he spoke with calm resolve, choosing integrity over comfort. His years of service had taught him that leadership is not defined by tradition alone, but by the willingness to act when something threatens the values the crown represents. Prince William listened closely, his expression firm yet thoughtful. This decision touched something deeply personal for him. It challenged the balance between family loyalty and responsibility to the institution he is preparing to lead. And yet he stood firm, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. What unfolded next was not punishment, but protection. Protection of the monarchy's integrity. Protection of public trust. Protection of values that had been built over generations. It was a decision rooted in duty, not emotion. Even though emotion ran deep beneath the surface, the atmosphere grew heavier as the reality settled in. This was no longer a private matter that could be quietly overlooked. A line had been crossed, and that line demanded action. The weight of that truth was felt by everyone present. Those in the room understood that history often turns in moments like this. Quiet, controlled, and deeply human. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, only a shared understanding that the course of events had changed. Prince William's silence spoke volumes. His calm exterior masked the emotional gravity beneath. This was not just about protocol. It was about preserving trust. The trust of the public. The trust of future generations. The trust placed in the crown itself. King Charles, though visibly burdened, remained unwavering. His decision was not driven by personal feeling, but by a lifetime of duty. He knew the consequences would be felt far beyond the palace walls. Yet he also knew that leadership demands clarity. Even when it cost something deeply personal, the room fell into a quiet stillness as the decision settled. It was not relief that followed, but acceptance. A solemn understanding that what had been done could not be undone, and perhaps should not be. Outside, the world slept unaware of what had just unfolded. But within those walls, of royal history had shifted. Something fundamental had changed. Trust had been tested. Lines had been drawn. This moment would not be remembered for its noise, but for its gravity. For the way two future-shaping figures chose integrity over comfort. For the courage it took to act when silence would have been easier. The palace remained still. Yet everything had changed as the night deepened. The weight of the decision lingered, not as regret, but as resolve. A resolve to protect what matters, even when the cost is personal. A resolve that would shape the days to come in ways no one yet fully understood. And though the world would soon learn of this shift, it would never truly grasp the emotion behind it. The quiet strength. The internal struggle. The moment when duty outweighed emotion, and history quietly turned a page. This was not the end of the story. Only the beginning of consequences that would ripple far beyond that night. As dawn slowly approached, the palace remained wrapped in an uneasy calm. The kind of calm that follows a storm no one else yet knows has passed. Outside, the world continued as normal, unaware that something deeply significant had already shifted behind those historic walls. Inside, the weight of the decision lingered. It did not fade with time, it grew heavier. Those who had been present the night before moved carefully, aware that every word, every glance now carried meaning. Nothing felt casual anymore. King Charles had barely rested. His thoughts remained fixed on the choice that had been made. It wasn't regret that kept him awake, but reflection. Leadership, he knew, was never about comfort. It was about standing firm when the ground beneath you feels unstable. And this time, the ground had shaken close to home. Prince William, too, carried the silence with him. His role in what had unfolded weighed heavily on his mind. He had grown up understanding duty, but moments like this revealed its true cost. It was no longer theory or tradition. It was real, personal, and painful. As the morning light filtered through the palace corridors, a quiet understanding passed between father and son. No words were exchanged, yet everything was said. This was not a decision that could be undone or softened. It had already set events in motion that would reach far beyond the palace walls. What made the situation even more complex was the emotional distance it created. The air felt heavier, filled with unspoken thoughts and restrained emotion. Loyalty had been tested, and with it, the limits of trust. The consequences were not immediate, but they were inevitable. Those close to the family sensed the shift instantly. Faces once familiar now carried uncertainty. Conversations became careful, measured. Everyone understood that the balance within the royal household had changed. Even if no one dared to speak of it openly, the decision itself was rooted in responsibility, not resentment. It was about maintaining the integrity of the institution, something both King Charles and Prince William had sworn to protect. They knew that allowing certain lines to blur would only weaken the foundation they were entrusted to preserve. Yet behind that duty lay something far more human. Pain. Pain that comes when family bonds are tested. Pain that comes when love must step aside for principle. It was a quiet suffering endured privately, far from public eyes. Throughout the day, subtle movements hinted at the gravity of the moment. Advisors spoke in hushed tones. Staff moved with careful precision. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. The palace had seen many moments of upheaval, but this one felt deeply personal. Prince William found himself reflecting on the future, not just his own, but the future of the monarchy. He understood that leadership would require moments like this, moments where emotions must be balanced against responsibility. Still, that understanding did little to ease the weight in his chest. King Charles remained composed, but those closest to him could sense the toll it had taken. He carried decades of experience, yet no amount of preparation could make decisions like this painless. He knew that history would judge his actions, but his conscience demanded honesty above all else. As the hours passed, the silence grew heavier. The palace continued to function, yet something invisible had shifted. The warmth that once filled certain rooms was replaced by quiet reflection. This was not chaos, it was consequence. What made this moment so powerful was its restraint. There were no dramatic gestures, no public statements, no visible conflict. Everything unfolded quietly, with dignity and control. Yet beneath that calm exterior lay emotions strong enough to reshape relationships forever. The decision, though necessary, created distance. Not just physical, but emotional. A recognition that some lines once crossed cannot simply be erased. And that truth, perhaps more than anything, left a lasting mark. As evening approached once again, the palace seemed to exhale, not in relief but in acceptance. The weight of responsibility had been acknowledged. The path forward, though uncertain, had been chosen. For King Charles and Prince William, this was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new and challenging in their lives, one defined by strength, restraint, and the painful cost of leadership. Outside the palace walls, the world remained unaware. But inside, everything had changed. The echoes of that night would linger long after the doors closed, shaping decisions yet to come. What lay ahead would test loyalties, reshape perceptions, and challenge the very meaning of duty. And as the silence settled once more, one truth remained clear. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. As another day unfolded, the silence inside the palace began to feel heavier than ever before. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the kind that presses against the chest, reminding everyone that something irreversible had already taken place. The walls stood tall, yet they seemed to listen, holding secrets that could never be spoken aloud. King Charles moved through the corridors with measured steps, his expression calm but distant. Those who passed him could sense the weight he carried. It wasn't just responsibility, it was the emotional cost of leadership. Every decision he had made over the years had prepared him for moments like this. Yet preparation did little to soften the burden. Prince William, too, felt the shift deeply. Though outwardly composed, his thoughts were restless. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind with painful clarity. He understood now that some decisions change relationships forever, even when they are made with the purest intentions. What weighed most heavily was not the action itself, but the emotional distance it created. A line had been drawn not out of anger but necessity, and once drawn, it could not simply be erased. That truth lingered in every quiet exchange, every shared glance that carried unspoken meaning. Those closest to the inner circle sensed the strain. The familiar warmth of routine had been replaced by careful restraint. Conversations became shorter. Smiles felt forced. Even the smallest interactions carried an undercurrent of awareness that something profound had shifted. The decision taken had not come from impulse. It was the result of reflection, discussion, and deep moral conflict. King Charles had weighed tradition against responsibility, loyalty against duty. And in the end, he chose what he believed would preserve the long-term integrity of the crown, even if it meant personal pain. Prince William found himself standing at a crossroads he had long known would come. This was no longer about preparation or observation. This was leadership in its rawest form. The kind that demands strength when the heart feels heavy. The kind that shapes a future through sacrifice rather than comfort. Throughout the palace, an unspoken understanding settled in. Everyone knew that the situation would eventually reach the public eye. When it did, interpretations would vary, opinions would clash, and emotions would run high. But inside these walls, the truth was far more complex than any headline could capture. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only quiet resolve. The kind that forms when people accept that doing what is right often means enduring discomfort and misunderstanding. This was not about image, it was about principle. As the hours passed, the emotional weight deepened. Memories surfaced. Shared moments, past laughter, and once unbreakable bonds came to mind. Letting go of what once was is never easy, especially when love and duty collide. Prince William found himself reflecting on the future, not just his own, but that of his children and the generations to come. He understood that every decision made today would echo forward, shaping perceptions and expectations long after the moment had passed. King Charles, seasoned by years of public life, carried his pain with quiet dignity. He knew the cost of leadership better than most. Yet knowing did not lessen the ache. It only strengthened his resolve to act with honesty. Even when the path forward felt lonely. The palace seemed to absorb their emotions, holding them within its ancient walls. Each corridor, each room bore witness to the quiet transformation taking place. It was not dramatic, but it was profound. As evening returned, the atmosphere shifted once more. Not toward peace, but toward acceptance. A recognition that what had been done could not be undone, and perhaps, in time, would be understood. The silence that followed was not empty. It carried meaning. It held the weight of responsibility, the echo of difficult choices, and the quiet courage required to make them. Though the world outside remained unaware, the consequences were already unfolding. Relationships would be tested. Perspectives would change. And trust, once shaken, would need time and truth to rebuild. This moment marked more than a decision. It marked a turning point. A moment when leadership demanded not authority, but integrity. When love had to step aside so that duty could lead. As the palace lights dimmed once more, a quiet understanding settled in. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was necessary. And in that acceptance, both King Charles and Prince William found the strength to move forward. What comes next will test boundaries, challenge expectations, and reveal truths long hidden beneath tradition and silence. And as the world slowly begins to notice the change, one thing remains certain. Nothing will ever return to the way it once was. As the first light of morning filtered through the palace windows, a quiet, heavy calm had settled over everything. The night had carried with it tension, reflection, and decisions that could not be reversed. Now, in the dim glow of dawn, the reality of what had occurred began to fully register. It was a moment suspended between past and future, where choices made in private would ripple outward in ways yet unseen. King Charles moved with measured steps, his composure intact, though the weight of the previous night was visible in the slight gravity of his expression. He had confronted difficult truths, made choices that pained him, yet he carried them with the quiet dignity that had defined his leadership for decades. To those around him, his presence radiated a silent strength, the kind that does not command attention, but inspires it. Prince William stood nearby, resolute yet thoughtful. The experience had reshaped him, bringing clarity and weight to his role as a future leader. He understood now that leadership is measured not by ceremonial appearances or public praise, but by the courage to make decisions that balance personal bonds with duty, even when that balance is painful. The palace, still and reflective, seemed to absorb the echoes of what had transpired. Every hallway, every room, every quiet corner carried the resonance of profound change. It was as if the building itself held witness to the choices made and the emotional cost of leadership. There was no need for grand announcements or dramatic displays. The actions taken in the night spoke for themselves, decisive, necessary, and deliberate. The removal of royal privileges, while emotionally challenging, had been guided by principle rather than impulse. It was a demonstration of integrity and responsibility, two pillars upon which the monarchy rests. Those closest to the situation understood the complexity. Bonds had been tested. Loyalty had been weighed against duty. And though the decisions brought a measure of distance, they also underscored the seriousness of the roles they held. Love, respect, and responsibility intertwined in ways that were visible only to those present. As the morning unfolded, the weight in the air softened slightly, replaced by a quiet resolve. Acceptance took root, not because the path ahead was easy, but because the consequences of inaction had been fully recognized. The palace, once again, breathed with the rhythms of life, yet nothing felt unchanged. The night had left an indelible mark. King Charles reflected inwardly, understanding that leadership requires sacrifice, often at personal cost. Prince William, too, recognized that moments like these shape the legacy of both family and institution. Their unity in the face of difficulty had reinforced the strength of the monarchy, even as it revealed its human vulnerability. Throughout the palace, subtle gestures spoke volumes. A hand placed gently on a shoulder, a shared glance, quiet nods of understanding. These were the signs that communication and trust, though strained, endured. In moments like these, emotion became as important as action, and presence as vital as decision. Outside the palace walls, the world carried on, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed within. Yet the consequences of the night would soon touch lives beyond those present, shaping public perception, family dynamics, and the narrative of duty. Itself. The legacy of choices made in solitude often unfolds far more dramatically than those witnessed in public. As day fully emerged, the palace seemed to reclaim a sense of normalcy, but the emotional landscape had shifted irrevocably. The experience left lessons that would endure about responsibility, about integrity, and about the courage it takes to act rightly even when it is hardest. King Charles and Prince William, standing together in shared understanding, embodied that courage. Their quiet determination underscored a principle that resonates beyond titles and ceremony. That leadership is defined by action rooted in conviction, tempered by compassion, and guided by an unwavering sense of duty. And while the palace itself returned to its daily rhythm, the echoes of that night would linger indefinitely. They would shape relationships, influence decisions, and remind all who witnessed them, directly or indirectly, that power is meaningful only when accompanied by wisdom and responsibility. The world outside may never fully comprehend the depth of what transpired. It was a moment not for headlines but for hearts, not for applause but for reflection. Within those walls, decisions were made that preserved trust, demanded integrity, and reminded everyone present of the true weight of leadership. By midday, the palace had settled into a calm that felt both fragile and enduring. Life, though continuing, carried the imprint of the night's revelations. And in that calm, there was strength, quiet, steady, and resolute. The events would leave a permanent mark on those involved, shaping not only the future of the monarchy, but the way duty, loyalty, and family intertwine when tested most profoundly. The choices made, though painful, had ensured that responsibility prevailed. In the end, what remained was a balance of reflection and resolve. Pain coexisted with purpose. Emotion intertwined with principle. And in that delicate balance, King Charles and Prince William had quietly reaffirmed the enduring power of leadership. Grounded in integrity. As the palace embraced the day, the legacy of that night endured. A reminder that even in the most challenging moments, strength, unity, and quiet courage define not just leaders, but the very essence of humanity.